Hello, in this video I am going to show you how to use the Flow REST connector to connect to a system called Zendesk. As it happens, we are using Zendesk as a support tool, and I am about to set up Flow to connect to Zendesk using REST API and extract the data for BI purposes. So I figured I might as well bring you along on the journey and show you how I do that. A good starting point for using the REST is to check online if there happen to be any documentation. And fortunately for me, Zendesk has provided pretty good information. Quick Google on Zendesk API brings me to this page where they give a little introduction. They say how I should connect, which security means they're using. In this case, they support basic authentication, API token, OAuth access. I might choose maybe API token in this case, but I think security is a little bit out of scope for this video, and it's different depending on what system you're going to connect to. So I'll skip that for now. The documentation also states pretty good how I can, what base URL I'm supposed to use. That is the first part of the URL. And then they have pretty good documented the endpoint mappers here. If I want to reach users, they'll tell me how I can do that. So the documentation here is pretty good. So that is a good first step. Check online what sort of documentation there is to your REST API. Secondly, I would recommend to install some sort of REST tool. In my case here, I'm using Postman. It helps both to speed up the development, and it's also really good for troubleshooting purposes. So definitely recommend using some sort of REST tool to run your queries initially. Okay, so next step would be to set up the actual connector in Flow. You do that by going to the Environment tab, and then under Connectors, you'll find your connector. Press the Add button, and then give your connector a good name. And a good name is not including prod or test, because if you will be subscribing from, say, a test environment to a production environment, the connectors have to be named the same. So don't use Zendesk test or Zendesk prod, but use a generic name for it. In this case, I'll use Zendesk out of an abundance of imagination. It is a REST service, and I'll give this a base address. In our case, the base URL to the actual service. That is what we got from the documentation. Under authentication, it depending on the authentication you have here. In the Zendesk case, I will probably be using the token based. So then I will be generating a token with a specific username, which for obvious reasons I won't show you here. But this is where I enter that data. And you're almost ready to save the connector now, but if I try to put save here, it can't be done because it hasn't been created yet. That is just because you need to go in and under the edit project, you need to sort of create it, compile the project. So just for simplicity reason, I'll go ahead and click create update connector, and then I can save it. Okay, time to start to create my actual REST project. I'm going back in here into the Zendesk REST service connector configuration, edit. And under here, I am going to start to create some models. And there are some things to think about here. Initially, I'll go back to my Postman tool, and it has, so this particular REST API has some specific things going for it. One of them is, and I've seen that at other services as well, that they are using Unix time for start time. So in this case, I read the help section, and they, fortunately for me, they have something they call incremental load. So I can pass in a start time, and so every time I read from the REST API, I don't need to fetch all the tickets, because But I can rather go and just fetch the ones that have been changed recently. So, and in order to do that, they want me to pass in a start time parameter, which is a query parameter like this, start time, and they want it in Unix format. So what I normally do then is I go into some Unix time converter, and then I can just enter my start date here, and I'll get that start date. They'll also show me the exact time right now in milliseconds and without milliseconds. Depending on which system you're going to connect to, they're going to want you to provide either milliseconds or not. And this is just a way that this works. So just deal with it. And then they have another good thing that I like. They are giving me the possibility to do something they call side loading, which is a little bit maybe can be compared to SQL join, which means that they are storing tickets and ticket metrics in different tables, obviously. So in my case, I would like to receive all the tickets that have been changed since a specific date, but I would also like to sideload some of the metrics on it, like is this an SLA breach? What was the response time? What was the resolve time? Things like that I can actually include by passing this parameter that is called include. And according to documentation, I saw that if I provide metric sets and SLAs, I get them here in my result set as an array. So that helps me a lot. I don't need to do multiple queries and then join them manually in Flow script or database tables or views. I can just pass the query like a GraphQL almost and get that result back. As a side note, I can mention that this is the query you could be using if you want to get the current date and then do the transformation into Unix time using a SQL query. It's a formula that picks a date back in time, 1970s, I think, and then compare it to what date it is right now. And if you want the milliseconds, skip this, divide by 1000. If you want to include the milliseconds, just omit this part. Just a quick shortcut, maybe if someone is looking for that code. Time to start to build the connector model. So going into models here, I can either choose to create my model from scratch, choosing new here, and then create my entire structure. Or I can do the shortcut, which is new from JSON. And the JSON happens to be the response I got from my list ticket query in Postman. Also, I tried to pass in a start time here, which is fairly close in time, so I don't get 100,000 records here. But then I run the query and I see my results set here. I Control A and copy everything. And going back over to my REST project and choosing new from JSON, since that was the response I got. I'm calling it tickets, and then pasting the data like this and clicking preview will show me the structure of this. Although there are some things to consider here still. One of them which might change in future version. I'm doing this demo on 6.11. And what can happen is the ID here, that's an integer right now. So the data type for ID here is an integer. And integer can only be a number so big. So if the IDs are going to get above that, I need to change it to it's called big int in databases. It is called int64 in C#, I think. And so, but a way around it could be if I just put double quotation mark around my number like this and do the preview again. I'm not going to see it here, but this ID is actually going to be a character. Future versions we might do everything as a character because it doesn't really matter in this and at this moment anyway, if it is what data type it is. The other thing to consider is this external ID will probably do something here as well, but since it got a null value there, it will give me this dummy thing here, which is going to mess things up. So I'll just do the same thing here. I'll do a double quote here, and then you'll see my external ID instead will be just a normal record there, or scalar value, which is what I want, right? So going on, this would obviously be possible to change in retrospect also, but I find it might be easier to just do it while I'm in here actually. I'm also starting to narrow down what I actually want to see here. So the via here, for instance, that is if it came in via web or email. Say that I decide here that I don't want the source. I'm happy just to see if it comes from web or email or phone or what channel it came via. So I'll just delete that. And then when I do a new preview here, I see that I have via and channel. So using this way, I would narrow down my result set by quite a bit, to be honest. Say I don't want the recipients, I want priority, I want status, I want the subject, maybe raw description is a little bit abundant. And pressing OK will save my tickets model, and it is looking like this right now. Next thing to do is start to create my operations. I've started to rename my top folder here to Zendesk, since that made more sense. Under that, I'm going to create a new container or a new folder. I'm going to call it V2. That is because they probably are going to provide me with different versions of the REST API calls. And right now, all of them are in version 2. But if they come out with newer, later graded stuff that is V3, I can put them all under V3. So when I have it there, I'm going to set the path to be v2. If you remember how the Postman here had the base URI and then v2. Happy with that, I am creating a new container under there that is called tickets. Because I want to differentiate between tickets users and organization here later on. So I have my ticket, now it's time for the operation. And my first operation will be called tickets incremental cursor. I remember how they told me that this was a cursor, so I am doing the same thing there. I am getting my path from Postman incremental, and I try to have as a rule of thumb that I am going to end with the end slash and never start with it, so that's what I'm doing here. That's my path, and the display name and description will be similar, and it's a get HTTP request. And remember how we talked about security? I need to add an authorization scheme here because I haven't defined one. So I'm going to go out and press save there. And in this case, this was a API, Zendesk API token I created at their site. So I'm going to create one of these like this. And API key name is going to be Zendesk API token. So now I have an authorization scheme, and the thing is I need to connect this to this guy here in order to send that as an input parameter, you can say, when I'm validating myself. Alright, I have my tickets, and this is actually the thing that maybe I should just have started the video by saying this, because this is where people go wrong, I think. Under the output here, so the ticket, when I'm sending this REST request, I'm going to get an output, which is going to be hopefully OK. And in that OK request, that is where I am tying together with my model I just created here. So I'll now have tickets right there. We also need to send in some input parameters, if you remember. So I'll just go ahead and add them here. We had new query that was start time. It is going to be a required value. And then we had the input, the include. And I'll actually set this as required as well. There we go. And if I go ahead and create and update the connector now, and then press save, I will have access to my new Zendesk tickets out newly created connector here, Zendesk. if I click select operations, sometimes I need to do a refresh here. It depends if you have made changes since you last were in here. And this is my operation that I created, and it wants a start time. Remember how I added those two parameters? This could either be a variable coming from earlier in the flow or a constant. To be a little bit lazy here, I'm going to use my constant value that I had there. And the same thing with include. I am going to just grab what I had here for this value. And see here how the output, the OK, and here is my entire array of the outputs from the REST API. I'm going to call this tickets out and press OK. And then just initially put a user step here where I can validate my ticket out dot response phrase. So in this case, I'm just going to see if this all goes well or not. I can run this from the debugger. I don't need to run it from a web client or mobile client. And I see that my output here is OK. And if I go in and check the structure here, I'll see my tickets out, I'll see my OK, and here I'll see my entire structure. Now, going back into the connector, I have, similar to a TV chef, I have prepared some things so you don't need to slowly sit and watch my food cooking here. What I've been doing is I've been creating some more tickets and organizations, and this is a feature here that we call categories. So we can put our models into categories and substructures of categories. And my advice here is to separate them so we can put version 2 again, having different versions. This is not your version, it's the APIs. So if we get to version 3, we can put that in there. Then I have the ticket, the users, and the organization. These are my base calls. And what I've been doing here as well, if I expand this, tickets, remember how we, for instance, had our custom fields in here, or our metric set we added. What I actually done here is to this model here, instead of having just the array, I created a new model just out of the tickets, and I put them in a category here I called embedded objects. So here I have the tickets, so I brought that out, and even under tickets I brought custom fields into their own. So custom fields here, user fields is its own value, organization fields there. So what this does is I have an object in an object in an object building up to my entire structure here, and that makes it a little bit easier if I just want to, if we decide to add more custom fields or something like that, I don't need to go into all places to change it. I can just change the very underlying structure object. This is similar maybe to have a fragment, a workflow fragment within another workflow fragment, and then have the base flow on top of it. So the categories is pretty good to use, I would say, to categorize my things and clean up a little bit, and then put everything that is embedded under its own folder. Could be a word of advice. And then I separated also my tickets and my users and organization, things like this. When you're done with that, don't forget to do create update connector and save. And once you've done that, you normally need to go in and do a refresh here, select operation and a refresh to be able to see everything, or see your changes rather. So now that we got some values out of Zendesk, we would maybe like to work with the data a little bit. And unfortunately, we don't have a really good JSON-based control here to show things. And if I am trying to, for instance, I have my tickets like this, and I'm trying to add all the columns in a data grid, it won't really work because Flow can't resolve the variable. Because remember how we have a record containing a table containing records and so on. Array is not the same thing as a structured database table layer. So we need to flat out the data a little bit. And I've prepared a little flow script for you guys here with a map as construct. And what we are doing here is I'm using FlowScript to transform the data into one flat table. And I'm using my tickets out, OK tickets as, and I'm just getting my ID. But then if I am having something that goes within under my metric set, remember how that was a sub level out of my tickets site, I'm bringing that up, even one layer more. So I'm bringing the calendar item up here in reply and calling it reply time minutes. And then I'm also using some where classes here. So what I get from this is a flat table instead of the JSON structure. So now instead of using my broken tickets out, I can use my ticket map and show my columns here. And again, I can start my workflow from the debugger, and let's see if we get any data. Yes, we did. So here is my data. Taking it from here, what I do in my case is we populate a data layer, Oracle tables, with the incremental loads every day. So we get a BI, or business intelligence data layer, so we can use different BI tools, our portal and whatnot, to read the data without having to go and access the data every time. If you just want to show these tickets, you can obviously just display them in Flow. All right, thank you for watching. Hope it's been useful for you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.